Hello and Assalamu alaikum. I hope you all are doing well and having a great time. Today I have a guest here with me, Brother Farhan Ahmed from USA, and we will be talking about it. It's basically a series related to marriage, and the first part will be about premarital coaching. Before moving on, I would highly appreciate if you can support me on Patreon. It's patreon.com/Muaaz. And if you are liking my content, do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more podcasts. Let's just get to know about Brother Farhan Ahmed. Over to you, brother. Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me. My name is Farhan Ahmed. I started my own organization called Ihsan Coaching. I have my master's in clinical mental health counseling, and it's we have myself and four other staff members as well. So they all have their masters or doctorates in either clinical mental health counseling, clinical psychology, or clinical social work. So I do, for everyone that's listening, please visit our website, www.ihsancoaching.com, IHSAN coaching.com, and you can see the list of services that we offer. And one that we are going to be talking about today, premarital coaching, and also marital coaching, which is if anybody has issues in their own marriages. So not only these two, but we offer a list of a variety of services related to, mental health. So, please give us a visit, and thank you for having me again.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. It's again highly appreciable that we are talking again on some topic that's very important to the society. Uh, I will definitely add the link of your Instagram handle and also your website so that people can get benefit from it. So starting from this premarital coaching, so that's the first
Mhm.
basic step that what usually happens in society that people are not aware that why are they doing marriage and what they're gonna get out of the marriage. And
Yeah.
so, how do you see it that when ultimately what happens is that when such people get into a relationship of marriage, there is no vision, there is no direction, there is no
Hmm.
basic, on which there is a foundation can be built on. So
Yeah.
it all starts at the basic grassroots level of the foundation, that there should be at least have there should be a common depth of understanding, or there should be a vision that what is actually marriage and how a person should be proceeding with that. So I'll quickly come to the point that how do you see that what's the importance of premarital coaching?
Well, I think premarital coaching is something that's necessary for everyone. A lot of people think that, well, we've discussed all the questions beforehand, or our parents have done the ample amount of research upon the person, a spouse, right? That a potential spouse that I'm going to be marrying, right? They know somebody through their families, right? Your mom or dad might know the potential spouse's mom or dad, or something of that nature, and then they speak with one another, right? And then they say, well, I have a daughter, and you have a son, and why not? Our families are good, look like potential good matches. Why not just get each other, them married to each other, right? Or a lot of times nowadays it's really it's from arranged marriages. A lot of people here in the US are going on these apps, right? Minder, or um, whatever apps there are, and trying to look for potential spouses. But what I always tell people is that regardless of how you find your spouse, premarital coaching is a necessity. Why? Is because you never know who the person you're marrying. You never know that person exactly until you actually marry them, right? It doesn't matter if they seem like a good potential match on paper, but until you actually marry them and you live with them, right? What does the hadith say? The Prophet ﷺ said, you don't know a person until what? Until you either live with them or you travel with them. So, I mean, a lot of times what happens is that in this whole process of getting to know one another and seeing if we're a good potential match, A lot of people, they just say what they think the other person wants to hear, right? You might have came to that age where it's about time to get married, and now what we have to do is, we're trying to, we might find somebody that we actually think we might get along with or we like, right? And so then what happens is that when we start asking all these questions, right, to that potential spouse, now what's going to happen is that they're going to say things that that person might actually, that they think that the person wants to actually hear, right? And 90% of communication is actually nonverbal. So I could be saying something, but my body could be reacting a different way, or my body language tells a different story. So this is why it's so important to come to a third party, like somebody like us or someone else that's trained in this field, right? And get premarital coaching done, because a lot of times we've found out that people are not asking the right questions, right? I mean, first of all, our parents, they don't teach us what marriage is, right? I don't know how it is over there exactly, like maybe your situation or in Pakistan and whatnot, but most parents that I know over here that are from India or Pakistan or from the subcontinent, when I ask the children when they're getting married, like, okay, did your parents ever show affection in front of each other? Did they ever hold each other's hands? Like, how was their marriage? Majority of them said, yeah, my parents never did any of that, right? So what we're seeing is dysfunctional families, like dysfunctional marriages, right? So already in the US specifically, the divorce rate is 33.3% for Muslims, right? And even so, that's one out of every three that gets divorced. And out of those that stay together, 70 to 75% are unhappy in their marriages. So what are we showing our children, right? Or what are we as children seeing when we look at our parents? We're not seeing happy marriages. So then what happens? We're observational learners, and then we go into our own marriages, and then it's a cycle, just repeats itself, right? So and even when people get married, right? Our parents are not telling us like what exactly a marriage entails. So yeah, we're just thinking that, okay, this person's a good match, let's just get married to them and whatnot, and then we'll figure it out, right? But that's just a recipe for disaster, trying to figure it out on the fly. So that's why premarital coaching is very necessary. It will lead to less divorces. And what we always say is this, right? Like what we do in our organization is that we have 5 sessions. The first session is with both potential spouses, and we're asking a list of questions, right? We'd go over topics such as finances, right? We talk about sexual intimacy. We talk about relationships, previous relationships. Have you ever been married before? Have you ever been proposed to before? Have you ever been in a relationship before? Why is that necessary? Because a lot of times we bring that baggage into our new marriage, right? Into our actual marriage, right? And then what happens is it causes potential issues. Like could cause potential issues. We talk about health related, right? Because you know, um, do you have any health related issues that your potential spouse does not know, right? We talk about religiosity? Where are you religiously? Because look, if one person is on one end of the spectrum and the other person's on the other end of the spectrum, well, we don't want two people that don't see each other eye to eye. That could be a potential issue, right? So it's about working with one another. Then we also talk about in-laws, right? That's a huge topic. A mother-in-law in general, father-in-laws, right? From both sides, because that causes a lot of issues within a marriage. So after we talk about all of these these topics, then what we do is session 2 and 3 is with the individual person, right? So we've noted down what they've said or what the potential spouse said, and then now we're talking to them on an individual level, saying, well, you heard all of this, and what did you think about it? And, highlighting some aspects where we might have seen their facial expressions change, or their body language saying telling a different story than what they're actually saying. And then, in the fourth session, we bring back both parties and we discuss again, potential issues, right? And we highlight some of these potential issues. Why? Because we want to tackle them then and there or in the future, so if they do decide to get married, that these will not be a problem later on, right? And then in the fifth session, is that it's with a religious consultant who's going to talk about it from the Islamic perspective. Right. So this is our whole process that we do. And I think it's very comprehensive. And, we've seen that it alleviates a lot of problems within marriages going forward.
Perfect, mashallah. It's indeed a very important, and I believe the work you're doing is highly important and commendable. I mean, the way you have like broken out in a systematic way, I believe I'm definitely sure it must have been like have to have a great impact on people work coming in for the coaching. You mentioned about this dysfunctional families, and I remember we had this discussion previously in our last podcast, and
Hmm.
we exactly talked about this that usually what happens is that whatever we have seen that's the has the greatest impact on how we will end up in our marriages. First part.
Hmm.
Second part, when you talked about that emotional baggage, uh, like when you are having this counseling sessions, so that's the other part about relationships thing. I believe these are very two important pointers, and definitely
Hmm.
third one that should supposedly be the very first for being a Muslim. It's the religious part, and so what usually happens that again, if I usually don't see my parents showing affection to each other, how would I copy that unconsciously in my mind? Vice
Yeah.
versa, if I see a small act of kindness, a small act of sharing, keeping these other person first, and taking care, going an extra mile for the spouse. When I see this in my family, and so nobody is teaching me,
Hmm.
there's no lecture, there is no sitting, formal sitting, and parents are teaching me that hey, this is how it works. No, I don't want that. Alhamdulillah, I'm mature.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm a teenager or like I graduated. So like I can see that,
Yeah.
and I can sense that. So if you're doing that, I mean I'm an observation learner. I would definitely gonna copy that because you are my parents ultimately,
Yes.
and
Of
that's how it
course.
gets the connect. The other thing where you mentioned about that emotional baggage, I have this belief, and I usually I repeat it to even my students as well. That what usually happens is from the teenage at the start of the teenage, and and as we get older, people get into relationship, and what
Yes.
happens is with each and every relationship, what you have is that there is some lesson or an emotional baggage that's
Hmm.
built in back of your mind, be it a
Yeah.
good one. Usually it's sad one, definitely.
Yeah.
That's why you had to escape out of that relation. And what happens is that the frequency of those relationships, when you ultimately reach to that final stage where you are selecting your spouse, so each and every relationship creates a walkthrough gate. I call it as a walkthrough gate. What happens when you are selecting your spouse? You are getting your spouse through all of those walkthrough gates.
Yeah. And this is a very important thing that you mentioned, right? Because see, I think it's the more relationships you've been in, it's more dangerous when you're actually trying to find the person that you're getting married to. The reason being is because you're comparing that person that you're marrying to every single person that you've been with, right? Every single woman has a good quality or good qualities about them, right? And you're not going to find the perfect man. I mean, for a woman, you're not going to find the perfect man. For a man, you're not going to find the perfect woman, right? Which has everything you're looking for. But through all of these people, if you add up all their qualities, you can find you'll be like, oh, this is the perfect person, right? So what's happening now is we're comparing and contrasting every single person that we meet. And I've seen this constantly with like friends that I've talked with or people that, premarital coaching is that, they're constantly comparing that, well, this woman is amazing, but she doesn't have this quality like her or this quality like that person and so forth, right? And that becomes problematic because now you're never satisfied. right? You're never going to be completely happy with who the person you're with. And then what happens is that when you're actually married and the problems start like arise, then you're going back and regretting the person that who you married, and you're thinking, well, man, maybe I should have married that person. I should have, maybe, I made the wrong decision, and then, Shaitan, we cannot dismiss Shaitan. He whispers in our ears and says, well, maybe this marriage isn't good for you, or this person is the best for you. Maybe you should divorce them, maybe you should leave them, maybe you should go to that, try it out with that other person, right? So this is why it's so important. What I tell people is that even in our deen, what we learn is that when you find somebody good, marry them, right? If you have no reason not to reject them, you should marry them. Why? Because when you constantly keep talking to potential spouses, now you're just opening up a can of worms where you're going to not be satisfied. And that's why I've seen here in America, especially, the age of getting married has only become higher. Like, people are waiting even longer. Reason being is because they're constantly comparing the person, and they're looking for that perfect spouse, right? You're never going to find that perfect spouse. That's why what I always say is this: there's there should be 3 to 5 things where it's like a make it or break it, right? Where it's like, okay, I need these 3 to 5 things in my spouse. And if they have it, then I could work on every single thing afterwards, right? But if they don't have these 3 to 5 things, then I'm just going to call it quits from right here, right? And for every single person, that's different. For some people, for some friends here in America, what I've seen is that who they marry has to live with their parents, right? That could be one. For some people, it's okay, no TV at all, right? For some people, it's about my kids growing up a certain way, right? So like everybody's going to have their own 3 to 5 things. Now, if that person that you're marrying or potential spouse we want to marry fits that criteria and you see eye to eye, then what could happen is that you'll say, all right, well, everything after that, we could work on. Why? Because you're not going to find somebody that sees eye to eye with you on every single issue. And if you're constantly looking for that person, well, guess what? You're never going to find them, you know so this is one of the aspects. But in premarital, this is why we stress all these different topics, and we want to find potential issues to see if you're compatible, right? Compatibility is key in a marriage, because if you're not compatible with the person, what's going to happen is you're going to end up resenting that person later on, and you're going to have a lot of doubts about your own marriage.
Yep, definitely agree to that. And adding to just what we mentioned, there is one important thing also in this relationship thing. What actually happens is that being into a relationship before the marriage, it destroys that sense of affection that ultimately your wife deserves. So what you're doing is that emotional part and that affection part, you know, from your like heart and your brain, those emotions basically they are shared to each and every one of the relationships a person is into or was into. Ultimately, you are, that share of affection that ultimately was supposed to be for your potential spouse, that's decreasing as you go into the relationships, and that's devastating ultimately. Coming to the point about perfect match, I would definitely quote one of the uh, coaches I had this talk, and she did mention a very important thing. So she 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 was like, "Why are you finding like 10 on 10 while you're finding this file? Start with 5." And I was like, "Yeah, that's actually right. Start with 5. Along the way, trying to make it 5, 6, 7, 8. Then you will reach 10, inshallah, sometime." But what happens usually is, having those standards and those benchmark of, I don't know, beauty, fame, whatnot, finances or whatsoever. So people, set those benchmark and they're trying to find something perfect, which is definitely impossible.
So I agree and disagree, right, with what that person was saying. Why? And I'll explain my reasoning, right? Is, beauty does matter. Let's be real, right? If you're not attracted to your spouse physically, what's going to happen is, I've seen this a lot, is you're not going to respect your spouse, right? You're not going to treat your spouse properly. Why? Because you don't think that they're worthy of you, right? So that's why you have to at least be sexually attracted to your and physically attracted to your spouse, right? Because if you're not, then what's going to happen is you're going to start having doubts about that person, and it's going to lead to a lot of other things. That's why a lot in America or everywhere, they have, what do they call, the trophy wife, right? Or the trophy husband. Why is that? That's a real thing, because they want somebody that looks good, that complements them. Now, obviously, you have to be realistic that if you're, a certain number, let's say you're a 5 or 6, to marry a 10, that's not very realistic there, right? But to marry somebody comparable to who you are, right? We have to be realistic. But what's most important is that you're attracted to that person, right? And I think that's important. Now, you know what will also increase the attraction and being attracted to your spouse is not looking at other spouses or looking at other people, like men and women. Because when you constantly look at other men and women, what happens is you're constantly comparing your spouse to that person. And no matter how long you've been, and the longer you're with that person, what happens is it just becomes normal, right? It's just like you don't appreciate them as much. But when you're lowering your gaze and when you're not looking at other people, and like we're watching Netflix and we're watching all these things, and we're seeing all these perfect bodies and perfect people, then what happens is that we look at our spouses and we're like, well, they're average, right? And stuff, or they don't look as good in our eyes. But when we don't look at all of these people, then that person that we're married to, they're going to be more attractive to us. And that's why our deen is so beautiful. People don't understand this concept. There's like, oh, why the ulama and the people are saying that don't look at all these, like, try lowering your gaze and not looking at the opposite gender as much, because what happens is the more you do it, the more you're going to compare it with your spouse. So with that being said, yes, I do, I understand what they're saying, but at the same time, I think there has to be some level of attraction at the beginning, right? You have to be like somewhat attracted. Why? Because then you're going to want to approach your spouse and you're going to love your spouse more, and you're going to feel, you want to wake up in the morning and be like, you know what, I married somebody that I'm physically attracted to, right? But also compatibility and all of these things. Yes, if you're looking for somebody who's perfect from the beginning, you're never going to find them. But you could work towards that, right? And that's what we do in marital coaching is, a lot of people think is that, oh, I'm going to come there only see somebody like myself when we have problems. No, marital coaching is also for people who are just trying to they already have a good marriage and they're trying to make it better, right? And we have to also understand that aspect of it, is that, it's just not for people with problems. It's also for people that, are that want to make their marriage a lot better. So, yeah, it is like, we have to give it time, right? Like in marriages, what happens a lot of the time is that, the average time it takes for spouses to understand one another is 1 to 3 years, right? It takes time to get to know one another, and we're not giving each other enough time, right? And that's the problem for today, is that people are becoming impatient, right, in their marriages. And we watch all these Bollywood or whatever movies and Hollywood, and then we think, oh, Prince Charming is there and that everything should be perfect. Look, like I said, you're not going to know your spouse until you actually live with them or you travel with them, right? That's what the hadith says. And I truly believe that, and it takes time to adjust, right? So, but in premarital, what we're trying to do is trying to get them, we're trying to understand each other as best as possible from the beginning, so that when you end up marrying that person, things are, much smoother from the beginning, right? And now, if there are problems, how do we solve them, right? We want to be proactive and not reactive. A lot of times we are reactive, right? When a problem arises, then we try fixing it. But by that time, everybody has an ego, everybody's upset, everybody's mad. And then what happens is that nobody wants to give in, right? But if we are proactive, then and before issues happen, everybody's more calmer. They understand, okay, this is what we need to do if a problem was to arise, right? And that's what we're also doing in premarital. One of the one of the questions that I ask people is this, is that if you were to have a problem in your marriage, you felt physically abused or mentally abused or verbally abused, what would you do? And I asked both spouses that, right? And it's kind of a trick question, right? I mean, obviously, if you're being physically abused, that's not allowed and that's not permissible, right? You cannot hit your spouse, right? Even verbally abuse is not acceptable either, right? We shouldn't be doing that to each other, right? Women are more verbally abusive, men are more physically abusive, right? That's what research shows. But the reason why I'm asking this question is that, okay, to what level, when are you going to involve a third party, right? And a lot of the times I said, who, and the question after the follow up question is, who would you involve, right? And a lot of people say, well, we're going to involve my parents. I'm going to bring in my parents, or I'm going to bring in that person. And it's kind of a trick question. Why I say that is because if it's something solvable, or it's not like to that point where it's physical or something, then, when you bring in a third party, I always say, do not bring in your relatives, do not bring in your family. Why? Right? The biggest reason is this: when you bring in your family, you're only going to cause more problems, right? They are subjective and not objective. No matter what, if it's the girl's side of the family and the girl is wrong, the woman is wrong, they're going to take her side because that's their daughter. They love that person. If it's the man's side of the family, what's going to happen is even if he's wrong, they're going to take his side of it because they love they love their son, right? You need to bring in a neutral party, a third party. We're just going to say, okay, listen to both sides, be objective, and understand, okay, where is the issues happening, and let's whoever's wrong, this is what we have to do going forward to make things work, right? So I know I went into to a long tangent, but this is why premarital is so important, because to get see you see the depths of questions that we ask, right? Is not just so straightforward. A lot of people, they say, "Oh, what do you like? I like this. Oh, you like this. Okay, I think we're a good match." Like I've had couples that came in premarital, and after they left, they were like, "Wow, we did not think about any of these questions." Right? We haven't been talking about anything either. We've just been talking about the marriage or like just superficial things. But when you actually get into a marriage, right, that's when reality hits.
Yeah, that's you did get into some depth, but I believe that's basically the point of the matter. So definitely, it's a good point to what you added on. And I would say just one more thing about this marriage thing in this premarital coaching thing. That again, I started with this. People usually don't have a vision. By vision, I mean to say that people are not aware why actually are they getting married, what they're gonna get from their marriage. And that's a very common thing I found here. I don't know about there, what's there, how mature people are, but I don't. I maybe it's not lack of, it's lack of understanding, it's lack of vision, it's lack of, I would say, tarbiyat or something. But there is a gap, and I believe that it needs to be catered in the premarital thing so that
Mhm.
things can be aligned in a better way. What's your take?
So, this brings up an interesting topic, right? And it might be a little bit controversial, but I'm gonna say it anyways, right? Is what I believe is happening a lot, especially in the US. I don't know how in Pakistan, but what's happening over here is that the parents are putting their children on a pedestal. What do I mean by that is that they're not like, see, our parents, like, I don't know about like my dad. He didn't come from an affluent family, right? He had to make his way. Mashallah, he's a doctor now, but his dad told him, "I can't do anything for you," right? My grandfather the same way. He moved from India to Pakistan, right? And at the age of 17, he got married. He moved. His dad was like, I can't do anything for you. I have 11 kids. There's nothing I could do. So they had to make their own way. Here in America, our parents, they've came here, they made a life, and they've become very affluent, mashallah. Now they obviously want their kids to be have a better life than them. So what happens is that they given their kids everything, right? They give them so much that when they get married, they don't know what marriage is. They don't know what responsibilities are. They haven't had to go through those struggles that they went through. And then what happened? So they've given him everything on a silver platter, or given for the most part, given him everything. And now when adversity hits, when a marriage happens and the husband and wife are trying to figure it out, you know, ev- to be honest, people are spoiled, right? You're not willing to uh you have this ego, you have this thing, well, my dad gave me everything, or my parents have done this for me, you should be doing that for me. We look at Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? We have to go back to the Sunnah if we want a successful marriage, because there was no marriage that was more successful than Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and Khadija radiallahu anha, or Aisha radiallahu anha, or any of his wives, right? That was the golden standard. And if you look at the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? He would never ask one of his wives to do anything for him. He never asked his children to do anything for him. He always did everything himself, right? I'm not saying that okay, that's what we have to do in our marriages. We're not like the prophet. Obviously, we should be, but we're not, right? But what my whole point is that we expect so much from our spouses all the time, right? We expect so much, and when they don't do it, we get hurt. And then what happens is that all these issues start happening in our marriage, right? I mean, what I always tell people is this: is that as long as your spouse is not stopping you from being who you are, right? And you have your freedom and you're able to be yourself, count that as a blessing, right? We want this perfect marriage. There is no such thing as a perfect marriage, right? I mean, other than what Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had. It's going to be ups and downs, ups, it's a roller coasters and all of that. And, we have to, a lot of times we focus on the negativity, right? And what's the negative aspects of marriage, but we don't remember all of the good things in the marriage, right? So what happens is that I think as parents, we need to prepare our children properly for what a marriage is, and not put them always on this like silver platter and whatnot, because then what we're doing them a disadvantage is that when they get married, I've heard, people say, well, I never had to fill up a gas tank in my life because my dad always used to do that for me. So they're expecting their husband to do that for them. And I'm just like, well, I mean, like, and the husband's like, well, I mean, like, I mean, that's great, right? But like simple things like that, or the husband, he might have his things. Well, I never had to do my laundry in my life because my mom always did my laundry for me, right? I mean, there's give and takes in a relationship, and in having to understand that part of it. So I think this is very important. Is we that parents, they need to realize that we're doing a disadvantage to our children if we are putting them on this pedestal and we're not teaching them the realities of life and what a marriage is and what to expect in a marriage.
Highly important what you just mentioned, and definitely that's one important thing that you highlighted, that maybe it's again top to bottom approach from the parents, that there is something, some kind of lackness from their end, I would say, uh, that basically not depicts the right picture. But I would just to add on to this, what you just mentioned, I believe if a person is like so mature enough that he's taking the life decision, choosing a career, opting out the educational field, making friends, doing the savings, making investments and things like that. So if all of these conscious decisions are so highly aware, and the person trying to make them as effective as it could be, why we question our parents for this lack of vision thing with respect to marriage. I mean, that's how I Look at it. If I'm so much aware about, good, getting it the best job for me, opting the right career for me, why wouldn't I have to have a vision, you know, about marriage, about my potential spouse?
Well, and you bring up a good point, right? And you can correct me if I misheard misheard what you're trying to say, but what I got out of it was that, like we're having these people have a lack of vision, but they have a vision for everything else in their life, right? Um, well, so I agree and disagree, right? Because a lot of people today, like especially, I mean, our parents had a vision. I think so. Like they were focused. I mean, in India, Pakistan, they have a better thing because once they get into, I don't know about Pakistan, but I know in India, what they do is that once you're in high school, you test into the field that you want to get into, and then that's where you're studying majority of your time in college, right? In that one field. Here in America, what happens is that you go into college and people pick a major, but often more than not, they don't know what major they want to do, right? They're not sure. They take general ed classes and they're trying to figure it out, and it takes a couple of years before they actually figure out what they want to do in life. And even afterwards, once they graduate, people are constantly trying to changing their careers, right? So and they're constantly trying to figure out like what makes them happy or what career they want to get into and what they want to do. There's not that focus. Actually, there was a research article, or there was an article that came out actually about Obama's daughter, right? And it talks about a gap year between high school and college, right? And how important, like, and how beneficial a gap year could be to for maturity purposes, and also having some insight of what you want to do. And that's what Obama's oldest daughter did before. I think she went to Harvard. I'm not exactly sure, but she took a gap year, right? And she was more focused. It talked about that. And I think so there is that aspect. Some people are focused, some people are not. But I do think that, it's not, yeah, when it comes to marriage, I'm not trying to blame the parents completely, because yes, as adults, we do have hold our own responsibility. We're responsible for ourselves, and everything. But I think, there should be some guidance while we grow up, right? And understanding, because like it goes back to the beginning, what we said is your observational learners, right? And what you see in your parents' marriage is what you're going to most likely do in your marriage, right? If you see your dad yelling at your mom all the time, or vice versa, what's going to happen is that you're going to think that's normal, right? That's a normal relationship, right? And you're going to be doing the exact same thing. So, I mean, I'm not trying to put all the blame or nothing, but I just think that, there is some responsibility on both sides, if that makes sense. And we do have to have some vision, right? And that's why one of the questions that we ask in premarital coaching is, okay, in 10 years from now, what is your long-term goals? How do you see your life? Because we want to see if the visions align, right? Do you, like they always say, the white picket fence, right? The big house, white picket fence, and big backyard, or what, or do you see yourself traveling the world, or do you see yourself like with kids, two kids, one kid, you know what I'm saying? Because we want to make sure that both of your visions align, because if they don't, then what happens is one spouse is going to feel unfulfilled in their marriage, and that's going to cause problems in there also, right? So, it is important for couples, potential couples, to have a vision, right? And know what they want as well.
Yeah, I like your pointer, definitely. So that's one important viewpoint you just shared. It's if you have some summary, I would say, because I want to make it section wise. So
Yeah.
maybe we can proceed further with the next topic in the upcoming sessions. If you want to summarize what we have just discussed, that would be great. Or it's so far so good for me. You're mute. You're mute.
All right. Yeah, no, what we've been talking about is, the whole premarital coaching. topic of like how to find a spouse and what to look for, and one thing that I do want to say is that, when you're there is a level where, it's a fine line between being picky and not having any idea of what you want, right? You can't be too picky, but at the same time, don't go into marriage thinking that, oh well, this person is a good person and I'm just going to marry them and things are going to work out, right? Have that 3 to 5 things where it's like, okay, this is what I'm looking for in a spouse. And if they have these 3 to 5 things, then I could work on everything else. But if they don't have it, then you know what? It's probably not worth it for me. But also, I want to emphasize the point of premarital coaching. A lot of times we think we ask the questions, right? That we're asking the right questions, but we find out that perhaps we did not, you know, and divorce rates are so high and they could have been avoided if we actually took the time and went to an expert and saw if this person is the right one for me or not. It could save us a lot of heartache and a lot of money because divorce is not cheap, especially here in America. I know people that spend upwards of $50,000 or more, right? And that's not uncommon. So it's, like we have to make sure that, we are doing our due diligence when we're selecting a spouse and making sure that, we are finding the one that's compatible for us, right? A lot of the times what happens is that people will say things what they think the other person wants to hear, right? So if I'm getting married and if I really like this girl, I'm gonna say think if I think that she's gonna like this, I'm gonna say it, right? And vice versa, right? I've known so many couples. I'll give you one example, and I'll stop. And here is that there was a couple, and the man, he said he told his wife, now their husband and wife, but he told her that, yeah, I'm almost done with college, right? And the woman said, yeah, I have my associate's degree, which means like they've done 2 years over here, right? When they end up getting married, she never started college and he didn't even have his associate's degree, right? So I mean, and it's not uncommon, right? Like people will, it's like your resume, right? When you're on your resume, you add in things over there, just trying to, make yourself look more eligible and a better candidate, right? So this is what happens in marriage also. So you need to have an expert who could decipher all of these things and find out, okay, are these people really compatible? Are they not? And if they are, okay, well, these are potential. And if you're adamant about getting married, well, these are potential issues where you should, you should look out for going forward. So,
That's some interesting example you just shared. Jazakallah khair for summarizing it, and looking forward to connecting again and to proceed further with the upcoming topics.
no, I appreciate you having me and looking forward to it as well.